Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion, and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, including Gordon S., Johan A., Micah P., Terry P., at CampSit Research, Tanaris E., at Nordic Uranium, Evan L., Vigo O., at Bouncing Stock XP, at Mark J. Harry, and Scott W. Returning guest on the program today, Mr. Daniel Major is back with us on the program to update. Daniel is the Chief Executive Officer of GoviEx Uranium. The company is focused on development of two projects within two different jurisdictions in Africa. The first being the Madaouela uranium project in Niger that is at a financing and construction stage with a mining permit currently granted. And then the Muntanga uranium project in Zambia, which is at the feasibility stage with mining permit also granted. GoviEx Uranium is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol GXU and also on the US OTC markets under the symbol GVXXF. Daniel, thank you for coming back on the program to talk with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you back, and good timing here to have a discussion on recent events there in Niger and, of course, recent events with the company. And now, Daniel, I understand you are in Niger presently for ongoing meetings with the government regarding mining permit for the Madaouela project and the new deadline that has been imposed surrounding that permit. Talk about the discussions, the process here, who are involved and representing GoviEx, and how things are going there on the ground.
Yes, I mean, I am in Niamey, the capital. It's a balmy 44 degrees outside, and the wind is blowing, and we have quite a dust storm here at the moment. But it's that time of the year. You know, I come back and forth to Niger on a fairly regular basis, have for years as the CEO of the company. I am currently here negotiating. I had meetings yesterday with the Ministry of Mines personnel and really trying to understand, their position with regarding Madaouela and what they're trying to achieve with us. Those meetings was constructive, in my view. We have a greater clarity with them of what they want, and really at the end of the day, Andrew, as we have been here for a long time with this project. The governments, like ourselves, want to see the Madaouela project. We've been in discussions with them continually since the mining permit was issued. And at the end of the day, we're all trying to achieve the same thing, which is the development of the project. And the government really is part of those discussions, appreciated now that, the uranium price has risen. If you look at the feasibility study for Madaouela, the uranium price only reached a level that we had in that feasibility study, as only as short back as September in last year. So it's only a recent event that we now have a uranium price that is in the ballpark of where we need it. And so, obviously expectations have lifted. The government is asking us to kind of advance our steps going forward. We were already working on the debt financing, and very much the focus was to move that forward. We had those letters of interest out there that we had disclosed when we started the due diligence from the environmental point of view. But at the same time, obviously, the government wants to make sure that we are moving forward, and that's really been the prompt that we've got. So I'm here to discuss with them, explain to them what we are doing on site, what our plans are. They're looking for greater clarity of that to make sure that we're all on the same page. So, as I say, I felt that discussions so far this week have been constructive. I am hoping to have other meetings still to be confirmed with other senior members of government during the rest of this week, again, to have those conversations and explain GoviEx's commitment. We've been here in the country all the way through since 2006. We've spent a lot of money here. We have committed all the way through the various stages of this project to get it permitted, recently updated our ESIA. So we're going in the right direction here, and that's really been my message to the government. We just have to ensure that we're all on the same page at the end of these discussions.
Very well, Daniel. I appreciate the brief on that. And, it's a little bit difficult to, I suppose, have a straight face sometimes when, of course, conditions in the country prior to this haven't necessarily been conducive to a good business environment. But I'll stop with that, at least on my comments there. And then also the fact that, I don't think that people could expect that Daniel Major and GoviEx Uranium can be having discussions about financing at a price of $80 a pound uranium or signing term contracts at that same price when, as you say, only a few months ago, literally October was in my mind, you said September, that this is now starting to saturate into the market. So who would expect you to be having conversations about, look, bank, we know the price of uranium is going to X number in the future. Let's just go ahead and have these discussions about a future price, even though the price isn't there. Highly doubtful that that actually happens. The other thing I was going to say here, of course, there's a lot of questions surrounding the events here. The audience has a number of questions. And to start this off with these various questions would be, can you give us a background leading up to this now imposed deadline, what the current validity period of the original mining permit was in terms of expiration, and just talk about the backstory for a moment so we can understand that?
We came into the country when Govin and Freeland bought exploration permits back in 2007. We went through almost 650,000 meters of drilling as part of this, and we converted to a mining permit, the Madaouela license, back in 2015, 2016, and partly because under the mining code there was a requirement to keep dividing your license in half. And that would have not made any logical sense to the project. So at that point, we converted it. And don't forget, back then there was always a degree of optimism. I mean, even post Fukushima, there was always a sense that things were going to turn around very quickly, and that we would see a rise in the uranium market very quickly, and things would improve. So, that time we felt that was the right thing to do as well. And there was I remember when I joined the company, talking to Toshiba, who at the time we were working with. Well, they were very confident, as a Japanese nuclear provider, but this is all going to be good. And it didn't work out that way. But we've stayed the course, and we've moved our project forward all the way through to the feasibility study. The mining permit, as you'll see, you can look at our NDAs or our FS. I mean, it's valid for 10 years and renewable then for a further 2 10-year periods that goes forward. And, the experience here in the country and then jurisdictions, as long as you are moving forward with your projects, you're meeting your commitments, your environmental, your safety requirements, governments will tend to always renew licenses. I mean, obviously that's not always the case, but is generally the case. So it doesn't make any sense to have an operating mine that's producing revenue and tax, or a project that's in construction ready to go into producing those taxes, and then suddenly say, well, we're taking your permit away from you. Because at that point, obviously, you then have other liabilities that you have to resolve, and it doesn't add any value to anybody. So, that's how the government has been, and how we see it in other jurisdictions as well.
Daniel, for me, I think for our office, we'd only consider the many African-based projects in the money at prices that have only been seen recently, as I alluded to earlier, and say, really, again, over the past 7 months, that's started to saturate here. And these things take time because, besides the fact that it takes considerable time and effort to establish term deals only after the saturation of that price point for some time, as you well know, and also the jitters that occurred from even a spot price from 107 back down to 80 roughly, also doesn't necessarily instill that confidence among some parties who have not done the work in the market. And I can tell you there are financing parties who have not done that work, or are just now getting to that work. So of course, these types of things are needed in advance ahead of debt finance vehicles, as you well know, in most cases. And if the market conditions aren't favorable or haven't had time to saturate with important financing partners, term discussions, and these prerequisites, does it make sense to start mining operations without some of these important investment milestones in place? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, we've been very clear in our path forward. I mean, we have been active in the market looking to secure contracts once soon as we had the feasibility study out. And, we were garnering, interest, and we've been very active in conversation of those things. And I think, we had already moved forward on that path. We were very clear in our announcements all the way along that we were starting with the debt side. We felt that was the most logical place to begin in this process, and we were able to announce those, the fact that we had those LOIs, and those LOIs are coming from substantive bodies, DFI and ECA, and that was really the first stage to show. And those company groupings, by the way, are still there. They've not gone away. I mean, I had email traffic from them last week, which said they are still there. They're not going away. And you're right, it takes time. And this, I think, Andrew, is the crux here, is that balance between expectation and I think and demand, and I say that from I mean demand as aggressively. It's the certainly in my interactions here this week, there is an understanding. I mean, the Minister of Mines is an accountant by background, and it was very clear that he appreciates those facts. But at the same time, there is, please, can you show us some movement forward? And that is what we're trying to explain, is that's exactly what we are seeking to do. We do not want to, walk away from this project. We've put a lot of time and effort into the Madaouela project and commitment. But, a lot has changed in Niger in the last few months, and, we are learning to move with that change. It's not an everyday experience. We've got political change in many ways, but we're still working and communicating with government, and hopefully we find a path that we're all comfortable with to move forward on.
Thank you for that. And I would just say too, I think it's good to point out that there has to be some kind of understanding here, because the reality is when you look at this and you want to see some type of movement forward, well, tell me where that movement forward is in this particular cost profile and this tier class of projects globally. It's a tough one to answer today. And even if you look at a peer company, for example, well, obviously the production profile of obviously is different than the production profile, cost profile of Madaouela. So how is it that they can progress in simultaneous fashion when they have different economics and different parameters? It doesn't quite add up to me. But I think these are pretty basic things, Daniel. With that, say what you can here, of course, but what do you think are the motives for this deadline? Was there any advance notices from the government about this deadline that you were aware of prior that could have been allowed maybe better planning and earlier notice to investors about a potential problem, besides, Daniel, of course, the obvious political debacle from 2023 that ongoes today? But was there anything that you found that was potentially an early warning of substantial risk here besides the obvious?
Look, we've always had discussions, and there's always expectations from government. And I think certainly in my discussions, I think the government felt that they needed to give us a more aggressive indication of what they wanted to achieve. You have to realize that for a period of time as well, we've had quite a change politically in what we've been dealing with from the summer of last year, where there was a period of quiet as well, where we were dealing with international sanctions here. We were working in the country, moving forward on the things that we could. We were moving very actively on getting the ESIA updated. But as you pointed out, we've had a very sharp move in the price in uranium over that period of time as well. And so people's expectations, government's expectations change as well. And so I think, that was really what we suddenly saw. We had changes in mines minister coming through. And so therefore, governments change their time frames of where they think things should be going forward. And Niger has relied in the past on uranium. It's a key part of its business model, and with ourselves, obviously, they've decided that they want to see more action. So, as I said, we're working with them, explaining them to our situation, explaining where we're going forward and how we're going forward, and seeking to find that balance that, everybody's comfortable that we're all playing for the same team and moving forward.
Thank you for that. And for me, I look at this as well, being somewhat familiar with some of the African jurisdictions. And, the reason being in our experience of recently in the past few years prior to Niger was, of course, Sudan, Daniel, where we had failed investments, admittedly, due to similar problems that we're starting to see develop here. And we knew the risk ahead of time, of course, going back to the 2021 timeframe ahead of the Niger issue, but we had already had a recent experience prior to that had us hold up a little bit of caution. But we've said this before too, that potentially Niger could become a Sudan. So far, that suspicion does hold up at this time. We'll see how that progresses. But with that, do you think there are foreign influences involved that would have an interest here?
As I said today, talking to you, I don't believe that is the case. I have to take that at face value in the conversations. Can I preclude that? As I said, at face value, and in my discussions, I'm believing that the government is acting in good faith with us, and this is about moving our project forward and coming to a mutual understanding that this is the path that's going forward and that we're all trying to achieve the same thing.
And any indication, Daniel, as to what happens next if, and this is hypothetical right now, but it's possible, of course, not ruled out, the mining permit is revoked? Is there to be an expected appeal process at that point to have further discussions about reinstating that? So what is your thought there?
I have to say at the moment, I'm focused on making sure we don't get to that point. And then we will obviously, as a company, if we get to that point, decide what our best course of action is at the time.
Understood. So obviously there would be, of course, cost impacts to stopping work, and the focus would then be potentially some processes here, legal processes, and reallocating the full focus on Muntanga, why that process plays out, because that, of course, again, will delay and take time. Before we come back to Muntanga for a minute, I want to talk about some alternatives first. First, as far as viability for getting mining activity started before that deadline, that would satisfy the parties, or maybe an extension to meet that milestone, some type of maybe option to extend or something to that effect. And then, of course, Daniel, that begs the question, what is the definition of a start to mining activities within Niger? Because that definition varies, whether we're talking about West Australia, what have you. Because I understand some of these pre-work, pre-construction activities are already taking place with GoviEx, which could constitute some of that work already starting. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right, and that's one of the reasons, to very much to focus on that here and understand what it is. And I think, that was something we've been able to have a good discussion about, that's exactly what we are seeking to do. This is, the French word exploitation, which under the code, covers construction. And, that's exactly what we are doing. And again, it's back to the comments before, just making sure that with everybody that, yes, we've started that, but they want that's a commitment we're moving forward on, and that there's an end game here as well, and that we can achieve what we're looking to go towards. So, I think it's clearer now that it's not just mining as digging a rock. It is about moving this project forward, and that both parties that that while recognizing the difficulties in financing, etc., that there is an understanding that we're taking this project forward with them. That is really where the conversation is at the moment.
Daniel, and at this point, and I know there would be potential complications here with this, but would it be viable for GoviEx to look at getting it started under an arrangement to toll process with Orano, with existing infrastructure in the country, as a way to get starting with remaining construction financing, long lead orders, of course, plant construction getting sorted out in due course? Is that potentially something that would be on the table?
Very difficult to achieve because we'd obviously have to still the pre-stripping, etc. You still got to put the infrastructure in. It's not just jumping onto the ore and sending it to Orano. There is one complication with our project is that we have a relatively high molybdenum grade, which Orano would not be able to handle and would be needing to make revision to their own process plant to handle it. So it would be a lot more complex than just literally deciding to go straight into ore and just send it to Orano. It's not that straightforward.
We know that there's complications on the processing side, which you started to allude to, and it's not just specific to GoviEx either. It also extends to other peer companies in the country. Just continuing with alternatives here, Daniel, have discussions been initiated to explore joint venture opportunities or potential project divestment at this point, or is that for down the road?
I think my comment to you is as a, my off-pat comment that I would give all the time. We're always looking at options to extract value out of our projects, whether that is, transactional regarding the asset or part of the asset. We clearly don't just assume that we're going to talk to the Canadian investment base for our funding. We look at alternatives all the time, whether that's coming in at the corporate level or coming in at the project level. And that's always been the case of trying to find ways, to source finance project. We would prefer to do it in as least dilutive way as possible. Obviously, again, we were at a moment of change, and I think for a lot of people, including ourselves, there had to be a period of stability created here to understand what where we were politically in the country, where the country was going to go forward to, and get people to understand the risk profile they've got. And so, I continue to have discussions, explore ideas out there in many different angles and facets, and takes it forward. So no, I mean, it's not as though we just say, well, that's the one path we're sticking with it. No, absolutely not. We're continually looking for opportunities. No stone left unturned, I think, is the right anathema.
Daniel, and this goes as well with my next question here, just about discussions with the government regarding improving the partner interest terms in favor of the government. I would also assume, based on what you said, that would also be on the table for potential negotiation.
As I said, and anything is possible, and we continue to look at any opportunity that would improve our ability to finance the project going forward.
Daniel, and with that, probably a similar response here, but would it be viable to scale down the operation to potentially speed up the financing process and maybe time to potential commercial production with scale up maybe later on? Is that something that maybe is on the table, or maybe it doesn't work at this point given where the project stands?
Well, I think part of the problem then comes down to your economies of scale, that if you start making projects too small, they become difficult to handle, and you then negatively impact your return. I mean, Madaouela assumes about 8 months of pre-stripping. If you slow the project down, I'll then be pre-stripping for 12, 8, 16 months. Well, that doesn't make any sense, and therefore to have that development rate, you still have got to go through that process, and to scale it down, you're now talking about scaling the process plant down. But if you've already done the pre-stripping and you've now exposed the ore, why would you not try and generate the revenue to pay back the returns as quickly as possible? Now you've got the ore exposed. So, we did a lot of that analysis back when we did the pre-feasibility studies and the feasibility studies.
And it makes sense what you're saying. When you look at these African projects, there are certain minimum parameters you would expect and production profiles you'd expect to be able to put the economics properly around it without temporarily, writing bad checks essentially just to get it off the ground. So I understand the dilemma here with that. Back to financing, you did mention some updates on the financing before, but I guess let me expand that a little bit, just get your comments on, obviously, with the issues there in the country, and also back to the dual stability comment you made. stability in the market price for uranium and stability surrounding the confidence level of financing the project, but also stability in the country can eliminate certain financiers. Do you think that there would be potential to also look at financing from other partners and parties that would not be just sourced out of Europe, Canada, or the United States, but maybe some other countries and other partners that you guys would consider there on financing?
As I said, no stone unturned. We don't just assume that we're looking at North American, European financing. I mean, there's nuclear companies all around the world, and nuclear development all around the world. We have to look where those investment. I mean, if we can maintain these uranium prices, Madaouela is a great investment for somebody. We are looking in all jurisdictions. We always have. It's never always been just a case of, go to the straight direction of it's going to be a North American financed or whatever. No, we've always been looking at other opportunities here that, may or may not work, and see where they come out in the washing.
And thank you for confirming that, Daniel. We appreciate that. Okay, moving on to Muntanga here, because it's quite important as really potentially here the first priority project now. Give us an update here just as far as full permitting status, community support of the project to proceed, what you'd expect, Daniel, on schedule at this point to get to obviously construction start, assuming that all resources would be directed to Zambia, and working on that project as other things get sorted out, and potentially that fast track. And then, of course, Zambia being certainly a preferred jurisdiction.
I mean, Zambia is a great country to work in. We do a lot of work with the government down, as we do here. We communicate a lot. We've had mine ministry visits, etc., to the site. We have made it clear that project is moving forward. I mean, it wasn't suddenly becoming a priority. It's always been moving steadily forward. We were always trying to bring two projects along. Zambia was just by coincidence of timing was always a couple of years behind Madaouela, but as we've had to deal with the moving situation in Niger, Zambia is effectively catching up. We've indicated to the market already that in the second half of this year we would have that feasibility study out, and would be then looking to move into the construction phase. I think the nice thing for us on Muntanga is it's a very simple project. The ore bodies there are soft, they're shallow. It's just a heap leaching operation. There's no real complexity in the process design. It's pretty much cookie cutter. That one's moving along very nicely. We've done a lot of drilling, as you know, in the last couple of years. That has expanded the resource. We did more infill drilling, which is we're expecting to announce in the feasibility study more conversion of inferred into measured and indicated. So hopefully when we come out, we've got a bigger project than we previously had. We're continuing to redo the test work because we didn't do the original test work, and we just wanted to verify that. I mean, you're committing to capital here. So we're going through that. At the same time, we deal with all stakeholders, whether that's the government, who we communicate to the whole time, and we are mine permitted here. That is key. What we have to redo is our ESIA. That is being done by a group called AMC out of Zambia. They're very proficient at it. We're well advanced on that. In fact, the only thing they're really now waiting for is just finalization from the feasibility study team of where infrastructure is going to be positioned exactly, so that they can complete the filing process of that ESIA. So they're well on track. We've been working with the community there, Andrew, for a very long time. We have to move some communities. For example, at Muntanga, have communities sitting right on top of the uranium deposit, and mainly because the uranium deposits there stand proud. They're hard rock, so there's not agricultural ground. So they've tended to position themselves while saving the agricultural ground further away for those uses. So, we employ a lot of that. We've done a lot of work. And if you go on our website, you can see a lot of the pictures there of community stuff. We provide water. We've provided clinics, schools. And then, importantly for us as part of this project going forward, we want to employ from the community itself as much as possible. And, we had realized as part of the census during the ESIA that we had a fairly subsistence farming community that obviously wasn't well trained in mining, even though Zambia is a mining community. So we started the adult education program down there. We are moving people through that process to get them to grade 4. We're already looking at the next stages of how do we add further skills to the community to allow them to access the jobs that are going to be created on the property. So there's a lot of communication. We've been doing it for long. We run a full stakeholder engagement program. Every meeting is recorded. Every interaction, we have a solid grievance program that if there are grievances, it's dealt with very actively to make sure they don't go any further. And I have to say there are very few grievances that we ever receive, and they're usually quite minor in what they are, and we can deal with them very quickly. So, we recognize this not just in Zambia, but in Niger. We work very closely with our communities there, and we have, according to the people that I've spoken to here in the we have a very good reputation as a company of dealing with communities and caring for the communities that are around us. So yeah, we're very confident about Muntanga. Obviously, the results will come out at the final feasibility study. But as an engineer, I'm very focused on pulling that as tight as I can get it.
Thank you for that, Daniel. And I think it's important to point that project out and the optionality that you do have with the project, in the sense that, first of all, financing partners can also look at that project and figure out how this sequences in with their models as well for potential financing of both projects. So I think that is an important piece to point out. And then as well, the valuation today, obviously, because the discounted nature of Niger provides that if you take a look at the financials of what Muntanga can potentially put out on a production profile, there is some value discussion to be had with respect to where GoviEx is valued today as well. And basically, there is next to little to nothing with respect to the valuation of Madaouela at this point. If you take a look at that and you treat them independently or you put them together based on these various outcomes that we can see coming down the road here, both positive or negative, there's something to be had with consideration of that valuation proposition. And with that, Daniel, I need to ask you this one as well, because I know it's on the minds of a number of investors, and folks tend to scream even louder when the price of equities go down, as they have recently across the sector, but also with specific situations like Niger. But the equity performance of the company has been poor on a peer comparison basis, too, on a market performance basis as well. But how do you see demonstrating going forward with this company that value proposition with the dual project focus? And then I have to say this, Daniel, this is meant to be a little bit of a laugh here, but in the degenerate investor speak, just to get a bit of a laugh, as some say on social media, when will GXU moon?
Look, I think you made the point already for me beautifully in the intro to that. I mean, if you look at the analyst notes that are out there, I mean, have a look at the ones that do write, whether the three of them, Red Cloud and A Capital and Sprott. I mean, their valuation, is now very. Whether you look at the pounds on the ground or at the net present value, you can go back and look at the PEA that was there and make your own assessments of that. And it's very, very much, a full underpin, and it's in a different jurisdiction. We went for this diversity approach back in 2016 because we always felt that we had to have the spread. And also, I didn't want to be in a company that was just a one-trick pony. That you once you've got that, you're like, well, now what do I do? And we wanted to have these opportunities around to move forward. So yes, very much the underpin. And I think it was interesting that I was looking at our performance in the last year, and despite that underpin, I think this is we get frustrated. All the things that are influencing us are out of our control. You look at the country risk factor that has been coming onto our share price each time. an event has occurred here in Niger, and that is driving us more than anything else. We are doing a company to find ways to move this project forward, financing, etc. I mean, there's no guarantees that any will be successful, but we're pushing on it. But at the same time, as you pointed out, when you look at the way a lot of investors have gone here, I would say that, most investors have factored Madaouela out of our valuation, and Muntanga is the core underpin there, and that the leverage now is Madaouela back up again if we are successful in extending, moving forward with the government on this, and that's very much the key. So I think it is being very much bigger factors that they're out of my control. I can't handle that, but what I can do is just keep our projects going in the right direction, working with the communities, working with the stakeholders, on both projects, and in the case of Muntanga, getting it ready, because it is, a project that, when we go out onto RFPs, it is nice to be able to say that we could deliver from one project or the other. And there is a lot of interest. And you made a comment about financing earlier as well. And as you can appreciate, financing is geopolitically split as well. There are companies that will finance into West Africa, and the companies that's not their benchmark. So, when I go to the SADC region and talk to the South African banks, they're very comfortable in Southern Africa. And I was at Indaba and had a lot of really good conversations down there about Zambia, and potentially, when we're ready on the feasibility study, talking to them. Those lenders at the same time don't come up as far as West Africa. So there is a different basket of lenders, of financing groups that operate for the southern region that are not in the West African region as well. And so it does give you a different, area to go through, a different grouping to talk to. At this stage, subject to getting the results out of the feasibility study, I'm confident that there will be people who will want to talk to us, and hopefully, this whole market is still there, and which I think it will be. I think the fundamentals for our industry are great, and I think, one of the things that we've seen overnight is this sort of U.S. ban on Russian material. That helps the African projects as well. Just because you can't buy from there, you're going to have to still get from somewhere else, and the African projects become very much part of that story.
Just one other thing before we wrap up here. On the cash and potential equity financing front, just speak to where you guys stand on cash today, and if there is a need to do some type of equity financing to raise capital in the near term.
I think in our accounts that we put out the other day, it was close to $9 million. We're obviously focused on keeping our dilution down, and we don't raise a lot of money, and that's what frustrates me. I do a lot without a lot of money and move forward. So it's not an expectation. I would like to be able to secure some financing at the project level directly, and that's really is where I'm trying to go in all the conversations and the groups that I'm currently talking to. As we get clarity on that, Andrew, then obviously we can come to the investors and say, well, this is where we are, this is how we're going to take this process forward.
Daniel, let's finish up, and thank you for the update here. I'll leave you with any final comments you'd like to make, and then also the last question here for potential investors who are listening in. The company has a market capitalization today of about 70 million Canadian dollars. Why should GoviEx Uranium at this price be considered within the institutional, family office, and retail investors' portfolio at this stage?
We are still not even valuing in properly our Muntanga project. That's a great project. There's a lot of leverage to be had there. And then you're getting, as I said in many presentations, in my opinion, you're getting Madaouela for free. I think this has been a lot of risk off. As I said earlier, a lot of our share price movement has all been affected by things that are out of our control and our ability to do that. We are very focused on finding ways to take these projects forward, and we'll continue to work diligently towards that step. So, if there are questions, we do, Isabel Villela, who's my corporate comms, she will always deal with questions that come through to info@goviex.com. I'm very much part of that process as well. So, please reach out if you. And I know I recognize a lot of the names you presented at the beginning of emails that we have already received in the last month or so. So yeah, please reach out. I think there's a great amount of value still in our project. I believe in the fundamentals of our industry. We'll continue to drive forward on our projects.
Daniel, thank you for that. Thank you for the information on how interested parties can reach out. Really appreciate the update. Thank you for coming on such short notice, and also why you are in Niger on obviously other more important business than talking to us. So I really appreciate that. Best of luck on successful outcomes.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks for the interesting questions, and always appreciate talking to yourself.